The West Philippine Sea,
WPS, the portion of the South China Sea that lies within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, EEZ, has once again emerged as the centerpiece of Manila's foreign policy and defense discourse. Encompassing vast marine resources and key maritime routes, the WPS represents not only a lifeline for national food and energy security, but also a test of the country's sovereignty and adherence to international law. Against the backdrop of escalating tensions and competing maritime claims, the Philippines has reaffirmed its stance that its sovereign rights over the WPS are incontrovertible, a term that leaves no room for ambiguity or negotiation. This assertion, rooted in international law, historical treaties, and the binding 2016 Arbitral Award, forms the legal and moral foundation of Manila's maritime position. The Arbitral Tribunal at The Hague decisively invalidated China's sweeping 9-line claims, ruling that Beijing's assertions have no legal basis under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, a decision China continues to ignore, but one that remains enforceable under international jurisprudence.
reinforcing this principle, the Department of Foreign Affairs,
DFA, issued a strongly worded statement on October 7, 2025, reiterating that the Philippines' sovereign rights, jurisdiction, and authority over its maritime zones in the WPS are beyond dispute. The DFA emphasized that these rights are firmly founded on international law and legal principles, directly countering recent erroneous opinions from unnamed states that sought to reinterpret or misread historical treaties governing Philippine territory. This latest declaration underscores not only Manila's legal confidence, but also its growing diplomatic resolve to confront disinformation and reaffirm its standing as a sovereign state defending a rules-based maritime order. At the heart of the Philippines' incontrovertible claim over the West Philippine Sea lies the 2016 Arbitral Award, a landmark decision grounded in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and rendered by the Permanent Court of Arbitration, PCA, in The Hague. This ruling, arguably one of the most consequential in modern maritime law, invalidated China's expansive 9-line claim, affirming that Beijing's assertions of historical rights had no legal basis under international law. The tribunal's findings, issued after 3 years of deliberation, overwhelmingly favored the Philippines on nearly all counts, confirming Manila's exclusive sovereign rights to explore, exploit, and manage the resources within its 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, EEZ.
Among the ruling's most significant determinations was its clarification that Scarborough Shoal,
Bajo de Masinloc, located just 120 nautical miles from Zambales, is legally classified as a rock under Article 121.3 of UNCLOS, meaning it cannot generate its own EEZ, and instead falls squarely within the Philippines' maritime domain. The tribunal also found that China had violated the Philippines' sovereign rights by blocking Filipino fishermen from accessing their traditional fishing grounds at Scarborough Shoal, Mischief Reef, and Second Thomas Shoal, Ayungin. Moreover, it condemned Beijing's land reclamation and artificial island building activities for causing severe, irreparable harm to the coral reef ecosystem, a finding that underscored the environmental as well as legal dimensions of the dispute. For Manila, the ruling provides not just a legal foundation, but a strategic shield, recognized by the international community and enforceable under global norms. As National Security Advisor Eduardo Año stated in August 2025, there is an arbitral ruling that clearly states our rights in the West Philippine Sea, and it is well documented. This declaration encapsulates the enduring power of the 2016 award, a definitive, rules-based affirmation that the Philippines' claims are not matters of political preference, but of established international law, binding, irreversible, and incontrovertible. The Philippines' claim to the West Philippine Sea is not a recent construct nor merely a byproduct of modern maritime law. It is deeply anchored in centuries-old treaties and constitutional mandates that define both the geographical and moral extent of the nation's sovereignty. Historically, the country's territorial boundaries were delineated through a series of international agreements that continue to hold legal weight today. The Treaty of Paris, 1898, which ended the Spanish-American War, formally ceded the Philippine archipelago to the United States, while the subsequent Treaty of Washington, 1900, clarified and expanded the geographic boundaries to include islands lying outside the Treaty of Paris lines, but still belonging to Spain, thus encompassing key maritime features such as those within the present-day WPS. The 1930 United States-Great Britain Treaty, which established maritime limits between the Philippine Islands and North Borneo, further solidified these boundaries. As the Department of Foreign Affairs reiterates, these treaties clearly and firmly state the extent of Philippine territory, serving as the historical cornerstone of its maritime claims. Domestically, the 1987 Philippine Constitution provides the constitutional imperative that reinforces this historical foundation. Under Article 13, Section 7, the state is mandated to protect the rights of subsistence fishermen to the preferential use of communal marine and fishing resources, and to uphold these rights against foreign intrusion. This provision enshrines in law the duty of the government to safeguard marine wealth for the Filipino people, transforming sovereignty from a mere political claim into a constitutional obligation. Reflecting this continuity of purpose, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., in his address at the 21st IISS Shangri-La Dialogue on May 31, 2024, invoked these very treaties, noting that the Treaty of Paris crystallized our islands into a cohesive whole, while the Treaty of Washington clarified the extent of our territory.
Our efforts stand in stark contrast to assertive actions that aim to propagate excessive and baseless claims through force, intimidation, and deception. In the West Philippine Sea, we are on the front lines of efforts to assert the integrity of the UNCLOS as a constitution of the oceans.
These remarks reinforced Manila's view that its maritime entitlements are not negotiable conjectures, but historically established facts. In line with this interpretation, Philippine Coast Guard officials in October 2025 categorically dismissed the erroneous view that the Treaty of Paris represents a final, immutable delimitation that excludes the Scarborough Shoal or the Calayan Island Group, KIG. Rather, they emphasize that these maritime features fall within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, as defined by UNCLOS, complementing, not contradicting, the historical treaties. Together, these historical, legal, and constitutional foundations weave a seamless continuity, from colonial-era treaties to the modern Constitution. Each asserts the same enduring principle. The Philippines' sovereign rights over the West Philippine Sea are not only internationally lawful, but historically inevitable and constitutionally mandated. The Philippines has moved beyond diplomatic statements and legal victories to entrench its West Philippine Sea rights through a comprehensive legislative and policy framework designed to codify, operationalize, and defend its sovereignty. Under the Marcos administration, this approach reflects a deliberate pivot toward a people-centric, yet assertive, defense-oriented maritime strategy, one that anchors national pride in law and translates legal claims into enforceable domestic measures. Central to this legal reinforcement are two landmark laws passed in November 2024, the Philippine Maritime Zones Act and the Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act. These measures clearly delineate the country's territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, EEZ, and continental shelf, giving legislative teeth to the Philippines' maritime entitlements as recognized under UNCLOS and the 2016 Arbitral Award.
First law is the Philippine Maritime Zones Act, which clearly defines the extent of our maritime entitlements and fully declares their metes and bounds in accordance with our Constitution and with the UNCLOS. Our people, especially our fisherfolk, should be able to pursue their livelihood free from uncertainty and harassment. The second law, the Philippine Archipelagic Sea Lanes Act, complements both our maritime and aerial policies by establishing a route system in our country's archipelagic waters and, as well, the airspace above it.
Together, they establish the domestic legal infrastructure necessary to implement international rights at home, bolster enforcement capacity, and compel executive agencies to align policy and operations with the framework of sovereign integrity. This legal consolidation complements the Marcos administration's uncompromising policy stance, encapsulated in the President's State of the Nation Address, SONA, in July 2024, where he declared to a standing ovation, The Philippines cannot yield.
The Philippines cannot waver.
The West Philippine Sea is ours.
The Philippines cannot yield. The Philippines cannot waver. We are now more conscious as a people and strategic in heightening our aerial and maritime domain awareness. We are continuing to strengthen our defensive posture, both through developing self-reliance and through partnerships with like-minded states. Ang West Philippine Sea ay hindi katang-isip natin lamang. Ito ay atin. Ito ay At ito ay mananatiling atin hanggat nag-aalab ang diwa ng ating minamahal na bansang Pilipinas.
These words marked not only a symbolic assertion, but a commitment to project maritime governance as a core element of national sovereignty. Beyond rhetoric and domestic codification, the Philippines has also begun expanding its technical and scientific presence in contested waters. In 2024, Manila submitted for the first time its Extended Continental Shelf, ECS, claim beyond 200 nautical miles west of Palawan to the United Nations Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, CLCS. This submission represents a concrete, internationally recognized act of sovereignty, a demonstration that the Philippines is not merely defending existing claims, but actively extending its maritime entitlements based on geologic and legal criteria under UNCLOS Article 76. Collectively, these legislative and policy maneuvers signify a new phase in the Philippines' maritime strategy, one that combines lawfare, diplomacy, and deterrence, converting legal victories into enduring institutions that assert, implement, and defend the country's incontrovertible rights in the West Philippine Sea. The Philippines' assertion of its incontrovertible rights in the West Philippine Sea has unfolded amid escalating confrontation with China's growing gray zone coercion campaign, marked by the use of non-military yet aggressive tactics designed to assert control without open warfare.
From 2024 to 2025, maritime tensions intensified to unprecedented levels,
with incidents between Philippine and Chinese vessels occurring almost weekly, according to Defense and Intelligence Monitoring data. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, reported that the number of Chinese vessels, both Coast Guard and maritime militia, operating within the Philippine EEZ has increased significantly, reflecting Beijing's broader pattern of sustained pressure and incremental encroachment. One of the most serious encounters took place in June 2024, when a Philippine serviceman was seriously injured following a Chinese ramming incident, highlighting the rising physical risk faced by Filipino personnel defending national waters.
The most emblematic episode of this intensifying pattern was the April 2024 Scarborough Shoal, Bajo de Masinloc water cannon incident, which the National Task Force for the WPS described as an act of deliberate aggression. During this confrontation, China Coast Guard and Chinese maritime militia vessels harassed, blocked, and water cannoned Philippine government ships from the Coast Guard and the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, BFAR, as they attempted to deliver supplies to Filipino fishermen. The BFAR vessel sustained extensive damage to its HVAC, electrical, navigation, and radio systems after being rammed 3 times and blasted by high-pressure water cannons at least 8 times, forcing it to withdraw for emergency repairs. This attack, condemned by Manila as a reckless and unlawful use of force, underscored China's willingness to test the limits of international patience while targeting Philippine civilian and law enforcement missions. In response, the Philippines has adopted a transparency initiative, a deliberate strategy to publicly document, photograph, and broadcast every hostile or illegal Chinese maneuver within its EEZ. Rather than matching aggression with escalation, Manila has pursued what officials describe as a proportionate, deliberate, and reasonable course of action that blends strategic restraint with public exposure. This transparency policy, first emphasized by National Security Advisor Eduardo Año, serves both as a deterrent and as an instrument of global diplomacy. By illuminating China's coercive behavior, it enlists international support while strengthening domestic legitimacy for the government's firm yet lawful stance.
The Philippine National Security Council, NSC, has also confirmed the increasing sophistication of Chinese deployments, citing the presence of the 165-meter-long China Coast Guard vessel 5901, dubbed the Monster Ship, which has been repeatedly observed operating illegally in Philippine waters as of January 2025. This vessel, the largest of its kind in the world, symbolizes Beijing's escalating maritime dominance tactics and has become a focal point of both domestic outrage and allied concern. Against this backdrop of intensifying gray zone aggression, Manila's dual-track response, combining transparency and lawful assertion, has emerged as a model of strategic resilience, demonstrating how a smaller nation can resist coercion through legitimacy, discipline, and the power of international law. The Philippines' firm and law-based stance in the West Philippine Sea is not an isolated government position. It is sustained by overwhelming domestic consensus and reinforced by a strong network of international partnerships that validate and empower Manila's maritime policy. Domestically, public sentiment has crystallized into a unified front behind the national government's efforts to defend Philippine sovereignty. According to an OCTA research survey, November 2024, 84% of Filipinos support the government's actions to assert and defend maritime rights in the WPS, while 91% of citizens are aware of the dispute, indicating that the issue has penetrated national consciousness as a defining matter of sovereignty and pride. This strong public backing has translated into political relevance. Survey data from March 2025 showed that Filipino voters overwhelmingly prefer candidates who commit to defending the country's WPS rights, transforming foreign policy into a decisive electoral issue. The domestic demand for a credible defense posture is further evidenced by the Pulse Asia survey, June 2025, which found that 65% of Filipinos want the government to prioritize modernization of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, and the Philippine Coast Guard, PCG, to ensure the protection of territorial integrity. Together, these statistics reflect a rare level of national unity and a bottom-up legitimacy for the government's maritime assertiveness, turning the defense of the WPS into a patriotic consensus that transcends political divides. Internationally, the Philippines' principled adherence to the 2016 Arbitral Award has catalyzed growing diplomatic and defense support from allies and partners. In September 2024, the Quad Summit, comprising the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, issued a joint statement explicitly recognizing the 2016 Arbitral Award as the basis for peaceful dispute resolution in the South China Sea, marking a significant diplomatic victory for Manila and a direct rebuke to Beijing's attempts to delegitimize the ruling. The Philippines has also deepened operational defense cooperation with key allies, most notably the United States, under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, EDCA, and through a surge in maritime cooperation activities, MCAs. Between late 2023 and late 2024, the two nations conducted 8 joint MCAs in the South China Sea, including combined patrols and domain awareness exercises, demonstrating a synchronized approach to regional stability and deterrence. Beyond traditional alliances, Japan, Australia, and South Korea have expanded their own maritime security partnerships with Manila through radar donations, Coast Guard training, and joint exercises, highlighting a broader coalition forming in defense of international maritime law. This alignment of domestic will and international support shows the Philippines' evolving role as a frontline state in the Indo-Pacific's rules-based order. The unity of its people at home and the solidarity of its partners abroad provide both the moral authority and the strategic depth needed to sustain Manila's incontrovertible stand, transforming what was once a defensive narrative into an assertive doctrine of sovereignty, cooperation, and national resilience. The Philippines' stance in the West Philippine Sea, WPS, is anchored not in rhetoric, but in the enduring power of international law, constitutional mandate, and a collective national conviction that its sovereign rights are incontrovertible and non-negotiable. The nation's position rests firmly on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and the 2016 Arbitral Award,
which together define and legitimize the Philippines' sovereign rights within its exclusive economic zone, EEZ. Rights that no amount of coercion or misinformation can erase. These foundations have transformed Manila's maritime policy from mere diplomatic assertion into a legal doctrine of sovereignty, strengthened by domestic legislation, public unity, and international recognition.
The Philippines has thus emerged not only as a defender of its own maritime domain, but also as a custodian of the global rules-based order, an advocate for lawful, peaceful coexistence in one of the world's most volatile seas. Looking ahead, the Philippines remains steadfast in pursuing a peaceful, yet principled approach. One that couples diplomacy with credible defense capability, dialogue with deterrence. This strategic equilibrium reflects the Marcos administration's long-term vision to uphold national dignity while avoiding escalation, to engage constructively while never yielding what is rightfully Filipino. The government's commitment is clear and unwavering. As declared by the Department of Foreign Affairs, DFA, on October 7, 2025, the Philippines will continue to assert and preserve its territorial integrity and strongly uphold its sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction in accordance with international law. This is more than a policy statement. It is a pledge to future generations that the nation will act peacefully, responsibly, and resolutely, guided by the rule of law rather than the rule of force. At its core, this principle defines the Philippines' identity as a maritime democracy, that its strength lies not in military might, but in moral legitimacy, not in provocation, but in persistence. By grounding its defense of the WPS on law, transparency, and unity, the Philippines ensures that its claim to the sea and its place in the international order remains unassailable. The commitment to act within the framework of UNCLOS and the valid and binding 2016 Arbitral Award will continue to be the nation's compass, steering its course through turbulent waters toward a future defined by peace, sovereignty, and justice under a rules-based global order.